In a small town, a blind girl named Neoma lived in an orphanage. But every time she sang, stray dogs came to sit by her side. They seemed to be protecting her. What Neoma didn't know was that her life was about to change in a big way, and her singing would lead her to a surprising discovery. Once upon a time, in the vibrant city of Onitsha, there lived a blind girl named Neoma. Abandoned at the doorstep of the horrified orphanage as a mere infant, she had grown up without the warmth of a family. For over 12 years, Neoma lived within the orphanage's walls, listening to the laughter and joy of the children around her as they were adopted one by one. Each time she heard the joyous cries of children living with their new families, her heart ached with longing and sadness. Despite her blindness, Neoma possessed an extraordinary spirit. She often sang beautiful melodies that echoed through the orphanage. However, strange occurrences surrounded her. Whenever she cried, dogs from the streets would gather at the gates of the orphanage, barking and scratching as if trying to reach her. This uncanny phenomenon created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion among the other children and the matron of the orphanage, who would scold her for attracting so much trouble. To the matron, Neoma was a disappointment, the girl who scared away potential adopters with her supposed witchcraft. She often yelled, "Why can't you be normal for once, Neoma? Every time someone shows interest in you, you chase them away with your antics." Each reprimand only deepened Neoma's sorrow, filling her heart with confusion and despair. One fateful day, a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Uche, arrived at the orphanage. They had been searching for a child to adopt for over 30 years. When they met Neoma, they found her intriguing and wished to adopt her. Neoma felt a glimmer of hope as they spoke kindly to her, but as they were about to leave, the strange dogs suddenly appeared, blocking their way. Terrified, Mr. and Mrs. Uche decided to return Neoma, leaving her heartbroken yet again. When she arrived back at the orphanage, the cold stares of the other children weighed heavily on her. She retreated to her room and wept for days, wondering what was wrong with her. The matron's cruel words echoed in her mind, and loneliness engulfed her. In her solitude, Neoma would often sing hauntingly beautiful melodies that resonated throughout the orphanage, stirring emotions in the hearts of all who heard them. One rainy evening, she sat alone in the corner of her tiny bedroom, singing softly. The rain outside fell rhythmically, and for a moment, even the storm seemed to pause, listening to Neoma's sorrowful tune. But the world had long since turned a deaf ear to her pain. Just as she was pouring her heart into her song, the matron barged into her room, her face twisted in anger. "Shut up, you brat. Do you think we want to hear your terrible voice at this time of day?" she scolded. "If no one adopts you by next month, we'll have no choice but to kick you out," she added, storming out of the room. The thought of being thrown out of the only home she had known sent chills down Neoma's spine. She dropped to her knees and prayed fervently to God for a kind family that would accept her, blindness and all. The days dragged on, and Neoma endured the ill treatment from the matron and the whispers from the other children. One afternoon, the children were all told to dress in their finest clothes for a special visit. Mr. and Mrs. Uche were renowned across the city for their fortune and generosity, and they had chosen the orphanage to celebrate a birthday with the children. The matron was eager to impress the wealthy couple, instructing everyone to behave impeccably. However, she tucked Neoma away, fearing her presence would scare off the guests. "Stay in your room," the matron snapped. "Your presence will tarnish our chances." Retreating to her room, Neoma began to hum softly, unaware that her enchanting voice carried through the air, reaching the ears of the guests. As the celebration unfolded, the couple paused, captivated by the beautiful melody that seemed to flow effortlessly. "What's that sound?" Mr. Uche inquired, turning his head curiously. His wife, Mrs. Uche, leaned closer, eyes widening in astonishment. "It's beautiful," she whispered, drawn towards the enchanting tune. The matron, noticing their intrigue, hurried to intervene. "Oh, that's just one of the older children. She's blind and tends to avoid people," she told them dismissively. But Mr. and Mrs. Uche were undeterred. They followed the beautiful song to Neoma's room, where they found her sitting gracefully on the floor, her head tilted back as she let her voice soar. When she noticed she was no longer alone, she stopped abruptly, her heart racing in nervousness. "I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to disturb you. Mrs. Uche stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. Disturb us, she said, her voice breaking. My dear, you've touched our souls with your beautiful melody. Mr. Uche knelt before her gently. What's your name, child? He asked softly. Neoma, she replied hesitantly. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard, Neoma, Mr. Uche said. Would you mind singing for us again? Neoma hesitated, but the kindness in their voices gave her courage. She began to sing once more, filling the room with her voice, as Mr. and Mrs. Uche smiled at her, their hearts drawn to her spirit. We want to adopt her, Mr. Uche declared firmly. The matron's eyes widened in shock. Adopt her, she echoed. You can't be serious. There are so many other children here, healthy, well-behaved children. Neoma is blind, and she's caused nothing but trouble for us. She is extraordinary. Mrs. Uche countered sharply, her voice rising. If you fail to see that, then you fail her. You should be ashamed. The matron opened her mouth to protest, but the couple's determination silenced her. Within days, the paperwork was finalized, and Neoma found herself transitioning into a new home. As they drove away from the orphanage, Neoma's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. After so many years, she was finally leaving and couldn't help but feel hopeful, even if uncertainty lingered. They arrived at the Uche mansion in Enugu, a magnificent structure that called around her senses. Although she couldn't see, Neoma felt the opulence surrounding her, the softness of the carpet beneath her feet and the polished floors echoing with footsteps. You'll be safe here, Neoma, you go, the family's personal maid assured her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. This is your new home now, and we want you to feel comfortable. I guide you and help you with whatever you need. Neoma's heart swelled with gratitude, but not everyone welcomed her new life. Amora, the Uche's daughter, watched from the top of the stairs, arms crossed in anger. At 18, she was used to being the center of her parents' world, and now she felt threatened by this blind girl who had seemingly stolen their attention. Her envious friend, Ife, added fuel to the fire, whispering, "Why would your parents adopt a blind girl? What's so special about her? They must be tired of you." Amora's heart burned with jealousy, and she clenched her fists, resolved to make Neoma's life unbearable. Over the next few weeks, Amora's resentment turned into active hostility. One evening, while Neoma wandered alone through the mansion, Amora spilled oil on the floor, watching with glee as Neoma slipped and hit her head. Hugo rushed over to help her, while Amora stood in the shadows, relishing Neoma's pain. Then, Amora took it a step further. She laced Neoma's food with laxatives, causing her to become extremely ill. Through her suffering, Neoma clung to her kindness, refusing to place blame, even as suspicions bubbled within. However, Amora felt empowered by her misdeeds. One night, as the family slept, Amora devised her most dangerous plan yet. She meant to frame Neoma for attempting to harm her. Slipping into the kitchen, she took a knife and carefully cut her own arm, letting blood flow before placing the knife underneath Neoma's pillow. Breathing heavily, she fabricated a scene, ripping a tear in her own clothes and smearing blood on her dress before collapsing outside her parents' door. "Mom! Dad! Help! Neoma tried to hurt me," she cried out, clutching her arm, filled with fake terror. Her parents rushed in, alarmed at the commotion. They followed Amora's trembling finger to Neoma's room, where she lay asleep under the covers. Mrs. Uche gasped as she spotted the knife peeking from under Neoma's pillow. "It's true," she whispered in horror. Amora wasn't lying. Awakening in confusion, Neoma's heart sank when she saw the knife. Mr. Uche, filled with disappointment, held it up and demanded, "Neoma, do you have anything to say for yourself? Why is this knife under your pillow? I don't understand." Neoma stammered, bewildered. "What knife? I didn't stab Amora." "Amora says you attacked her while she was asleep and then hid the knife under your pillow," Mrs. Uche questioned, her voice trembling with disbelief. But Neoma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how that got there. Please believe me." Amora stood behind her parents, faking sobs. She's lying. She's always hated me. She wants to take you away. Silence enveloped the room, heavy with confusion. Hugo, the maid, appeared at the doorway, hopeful to quell the chaos. Please, perhaps there's been a mistake. Neoma would never harm anyone, she's too kind-hearted. However, Mrs. Uche shook her head. But the knife, there's no other explanation, she protested. A curse, perhaps, plausible, Mr. Uche pondered, running his hand through his hair. The orphanage warned us about her, maybe it's true. With anguish, Neoma cried, please. I'm not a danger to anyone. Don't send me back. But her desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Mr. Uche's mind was made up. We will pack your things, you leave first thing in the morning. The next day, Hugo drove Neoma back to the orphanage. As they arrived, the matron's expression was a mixture of surprise and disdain. What are you doing back, Neoma? She scoffed. My boss ordered me to return her, Hugo explained, her voice sharp. But there's no room for her here. Another child has taken her place. But I have no one. Neoma pleaded, sadness washing over her. I don't know where to go. Hugo's expression softened. Don't worry, Neoma. You're not going back. You have me, she said firmly, revealing that she could take Neoma in at her home. I promise you'll be safe there. The prospect overwhelmed Neoma. I don't want to be a burden, she protested, but Hugo insisted, you're not a burden. You deserve love and protection. I'm here for you. Just then, feeling faint from all the emotional upheaval, Neoma collapsed to the ground. Hugo panicked and tried to wake her, but Neoma was in a deep slumber. Alone and afraid, Hugo banged on the orphanage door, but no one came to help her. Suddenly, a pack of dogs appeared, surrounding Neoma. Terrified, Hugo tried to shoo them away, but they wouldn't budge. One stepped forward and began to lick Neoma's face. Miraculously, Neoma's eyes fluttered open, the dawning realization set in, and she exclaimed, I can see. The world around her transformed as colors and shapes poured back into her vision, astounding Hugo, who stood in shock. As Neoma tried to comprehend her newfound sight, the matron rushed through the orphanage door, calling her name frantically. The door swung open, and the matron, with eyes wide, began to confess. I am responsible for all that happened to you, Neoma. Stunned, Neoma listened as the matron went on to explain, your mother, Dobby, was my closest friend. When she came to me for help with your birth, I was jealous. When your father abandoned her, I made a deal with a powerful herbalist to ruin her life. I asked for a curse that would strip you both of everything you held dear. Neoma's heart raced as the matron continued, the curse transformed your mother into a dog, a stray forever roaming, never able to reveal her true identity to anyone she loved. I made you blind to make you suffer just like her. Tears streamed down Neoma's face as the pieces began to fall into place. So, the dogs, they were my mother. Yes, the matron confirmed, her voice thick with remorse. The dogs that came when you cried were her way of protecting you. Only true love, shown by a stranger, could break the curse. But I was nothing but sad. Neoma protested, her heart broken. The matron admitted, I did everything in my power to ensure you never found love. Suddenly, from the shadows, Neoma's mother, Dobby, appeared, transformed back into human form. Yes, my child, it's me, she whispered, stepping forward. Neoma could hardly breathe, she rushed into her mother's arms. I thought I was alone, she wept. I have always loved you, even in my cursed form, Dobby whispered, her hands trembling as she stroked Neoma's hair. I stayed by your side, hoping we'd reunite one day. The matron, overwhelmed by her own guilt, sank in her chair, tears streaming down her face. I know I destroyed your lives all out of envy and bitterness, she cried. But I never imagined someone would love you like that. Hugo's love has broken the curse. As Dobby and Neoma embraced, they felt the warmth of family for the first time. The matron observed from her seat, the weight of her actions heavy on her heart. In that moment, Neoma realized that love was indeed the strongest bond, capable of overcoming even the darkest of curses. Together, they decided to confront Amara and her parents. When they arrived at the Uche family mansion, Mr. and Mrs. Uche stood in shock as Dobi introduced herself. "I am the rightful owner of this estate." Mr. Uche, confused and surprised, stammered, "We thought you were gone forever." "Your betrayal cost me everything," Dobi exclaimed. "Time has come for you to relinquish what was stolen from me." Amora's face drained of color as the truth settled in her mind. This can't be. But as they stood, the reality crashed upon them. The life they had built on stolen foundations was crumbling. The Uches began to leave, their heads held low, realizing they could not own something that did not belong to them. Neoma and Dobi were finally free to reclaim their legacy. As they walked out together, Hugo joined them, embracing her newfound family. They began to rebuild their lives in Dobi's family estate, transforming it into a home filled with love, warmth, and kindness. Meanwhile, the matron promptly received news from the doctors that her blindness was permanent. Left with only regret, she spent her remaining days remembering the choices she had made. Mr. and Mrs. Uche, on the other hand, had to learn what it meant to live without their former fortune. Relocating to a small village, they experienced the struggles of ordinary people, with Amora reflecting deeply on her actions, realizing her pride and jealousy had cost her everything. As for Neoma, the blind girl once dismissed as cursed, she became a beacon of hope for those around her. Her journey showed everyone that true value lies not in appearances but in the heart and spirit of a person. Neoma taught the world that being different is not a curse but a remarkable gift. Through it all, she learned the power of love, the force that can break the strongest chains of bitterness, hatred, and betrayal. It was a reminder for all to treat others with kindness, to embrace differences, and to understand that actions have consequences. In the end, everyone receives their just dues, often in unexpected ways, and thus, the story of Neoma blossomed into a powerful testament that resonated throughout Onitsha and beyond.